Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. I would like to make an update about the attacks against me and also explain what's actually happening to the best of my knowledge. I have been mutilated all day. Essentially, I'm still in my study. I'm trying to work. I'm desperately trying to make progress and work with other victims to actually have these crimes against humanity stopped. But essentially, I'm being shot into non-stop. Today the game was to just shoot into my face, and they are focusing on my teeth, so I keep getting extremely just powerful pulses of microwave energy just dumped into my teeth. And the idea is to basically, I guess, just burn off the nerves and then make my teeth fall out. I mean, this is one way they can mutilate women, and they have done that all day long. So non-stop shots to here, to my face, to my nose area. This was after last night. They literally just shot into my head non-stop. For the last couple of months, I have to sleep with metal or aluminium head protection. And when I'm wearing that, what they sometimes do is also shoot through my face. So I have to literally try to cover myself. And I'll explain to you how they're doing that. But essentially, these military microwave, they are microwave guns. They are so powerful. They essentially, when they hit the aluminium, you can hear it just make a sound. So when I literally have to wear that on my head, this is just for daytime, but what I'm wearing in bed has to cover also the back of my head. This is like I have to sometimes pull down a layer because they're shooting into my eyes as I'm sitting at my desk non-stop. So I have to pull this down when they're doing that. But essentially, these electromagnetic pulses are so hard that when it hits aluminium, you can hear it go. Not quite so loud, it's very fine, but you can definitely hear it. And then when they shoot through my face, essentially what I can also hear is, as it goes through my face, it will hit the top, and I can hear it essentially make the sound at the back of my head, at the top. Excuse me, at the top of my head and so on. Now this the sneezing you've just experienced is also one of those things. So a lot of victims experience forced sneezing. I think I'm still trying to figure out how they do that. I think you can do that by essentially going into victims' rooms at night and shooting an implant up their nose, which all it has to do is essentially just trigger a nerve inside the nose, and then you will sneeze because it's kind of irritating your nose. I think in principle you can also microwave somebody's nose area, and I have also felt that I would feel burning on my skin around my nose. So there are many ways to do that, but they do amuse themselves with forced sneezing. Maybe it has some sort of function. Maybe they shoot into our heads, and then the sneezing and the kind of like sudden rush in blood pressure helps to burst capillaries in our head. I don't know. I mean, this is essentially like a total a mutilation program. And I would like to explain to you how it's done. So to all of those who are new to this, essentially we have a situation where our intelligence agencies in the Western world, and from the sounds of it also much more globally, are essentially in Gestapo-mode. This means that they are rounding up people, they are turning on individuals, innocent individuals, and they're mutilating them to death. They're essentially torturing them to death in their own home, and then murdering them in cold blood. In my case, you can see for yourself 5 appeals to cease and desist I said to British and German intelligence and Swiss intelligence. I live in Switzerland now, but my targeting started in the UK. Followed me to Germany. I know for sure that MI5 or British intelligence in general is involved. I know for sure that German intelligence is involved. And now in Switzerland, Swiss intelligence must be involved as well. And for those of you who don't understand how it all can be, essentially the intelligence agencies are so grown together, they're essentially one organization. And this growing together happens naturally in systems. So we have, large global companies. In finance, for example, they figured out that all the banks are essentially belong to one bank. All the central banks belong to one bank, and in finance they talk about the one bank. And I think for the intelligence agencies it's also fair to talk about the one agency. And this is how they essentially just assault us around the world. This is just one conglomerate, one big organization. But of course, this is not how it actually is in legal terms. They all have their own statutory duty to fight terrorism. That is what they're there for. And the fact that they do not means that essentially we have dereliction of duty, treason and high treason. And these men have to be aware that in a democracy, when they turn against their own population, it is a war crime, and committing a war crime against your population is essentially treason. And when you're the head of the intelligence agency and you let this happen, it's high treason. So we're dealing with high treason and crimes against humanity, and premeditated at that. So essentially it's at least the level of the Nazis, and now a level on top of that. Even a level on top of that, because with the Nazis at least it wasn't public, but now it's public and has been public for years, and these degenerates cannot stop themselves. So we have literally this realization that essentially the intelligence agencies have hired serial killers, people who are psychopaths and literally actually degenerate. I don't just mean it as an insult, I mean it as a medical and psychiatric fact that these people are degenerate. And it seems to be the case that those degenerates have risen to higher ranks, and now they are out murdering people. And this is what psychopaths do. So they arouse themselves through the mutilation and murder of vulnerable people. So this is to explain why a lot of the victims are essentially disabled people, people in care homes, children, single moms, young mothers, single women, and also just women everywhere, and this is why. Also men are also targeted. Sometimes it's because they are business competitors, sometimes because they too are exposed or vulnerable or isolated, and all that happens. And there's also sexual violence against men as well. So this is what we're dealing with. But now to explain to you how it's done, and this is now to the best of my knowledge. I am a particle physicist originally, and now I'm a systems analyst for complex human systems. I am not a weapons expert. I am not a neuroscientist, okay? And I'm not a radio engineer either. So this is now to the best of my knowledge, based on the targeting I've experienced myself and roughly trying to puzzle together how it's done. But to the best of my knowledge, this is how it's done. So essentially, gang stalking, I don't have to explain to you, that is just the National Surveillance Network. I explained that in previous videos. Now the electromagnetic targeting works as follows. All you need to know is that microwave frequencies pass through walls like laser light passes through glass. Okay? That's all you need to know. Now this is a physical fact. You can Google that, I can put a reference up and show that this is the case. But most building materials like brick and concrete, microwaves essentially pass through. So if you have a wall somewhere, right, and then from outside you have, a gun emitting a pulse, these microwaves will essentially go through the wall, the wall of your home. Just like as if you had a laser pointer and you pointed that laser pointer onto the walls of a glass conservatory, of course the laser pointer goes through and you can point at somebody with that. But even if the conservatory had milky glass, a certain fraction of the laser light would pass through, and you could still see a fainter, point from your laser pointer. Now, and it's exactly the same here with microwaves, because when they pass through walls, and this could also be thick walls, by the way, so the typical building material, then 50% of the intensity goes through. So if you want to hit somebody with full whack, all you have to do is double the intensity here, and you still get the same amount of irradiation on the other side. So this is it. This is how it's done, and once you have that, you can build essentially focused beams, so collimated or focused beams, and essentially what you end up with is a situation whereby you can target anybody inside their own home. Okay, now the targeting I have experienced goes as follows. Now, a lot of people say, oh, it's satellites and it's just satellites and you can't do anything. No, I think it's much worse. It's not satellites. Actually, it is simple emitters. So based on what I've seen, I think, so I have a detector. This is, I don't have an assault weapon, I just have a detector. And the detector looks like this. Hang on, I'm trying to get it for you. So it has this antenna, and this one is connected to a measuring device. But the manufacturer who makes these antennas makes also little frequency generators, which is like a little black box, and you can stick it on here, and then you can literally shoot at somebody. Now, the actual size of this, right, is very small. This thing is very light. I can also unscrew the handle here, this thing. And then you have this panel, essentially, with a little black box. Now, if you imagine putting this down there somewhere, or like this, doesn't matter because you're still pointing. Imagine the handle is not there, right? It could be anywhere inside a home. It could be inside a car. It could even be inside a handbag. So you can place these things anywhere, and you can really whack out, depending on your generator, a lot of power. And then there are also, I think, assault weapons which look essentially like a funnel. There are also ones which look like a gun, but you'll be talking about size of like this, okay? So, you know, small suitcase or small panel and stuff like that, like a small telescope. This is what we're talking about. Now, those things could be placed anywhere. And based on what I have seen, what they have done with me is the following. My house, and this is now from top down, okay? This is my house, and it has all these different rooms inside, right? So, you know, I'm not going to draw a floor plan. I'm just going to make, you know, a rough, you know, let's say this is your study area, this is your living area, your kitchen, and I don't know what, another room, okay? Let's say, and you've got everywhere windows, let's say here, 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 and maybe a door, you know, somewhere here. Okay, now, based on what they've done with me, there are properties around my home and around most homes. And if you place emitters, one here, one there, one there, one there, then you can shoot at this thing anywhere. So this beam can hit you pretty much from here all the way to there. This one can hit you from there to there. This one from there to there. And this one from there to there, right? So essentially, with these 4 beams, you can irradiate the entire house. In other words, once you've placed down 4 emitters, you can irradiate. I think it also, you know, you could do it with 3 as well. But anyway, with 4, you're safe. And this means that in principle, so this is just a cone. I mean, the beam will not be as big as the house. All I'm saying is that you could take a laser beam, shoot it either through the window or through the wall, and hit somebody inside this room anywhere, right? You could hit somebody here, you could hit somebody here, and so on, right? So this beam can be swung all the way from here to there, okay? And if somebody is in this room, you can irradiate them from here, if they're in this room from there, if they're in this room from there, right? Simple. But it's even more than that. And I think this is what it's done with me, because I noticed that when I was very close to the windows, I would be shot in the face very intensely. When I was behind a wall, I was still shot at, but not as intensely. And there's also press reports in the German press going back to 2002, so I'm not making this up, where people actually said, you know, very quickly you learn that you have to stay away from the windows. And that's because glass passes microwaves at 100%. A brick wall passes microwaves at 50%, so half the intensity. Okay, and that's what I experienced as well. I've got very big windows in the living room, and we've got a dining room as well, and those 2 rooms are essentially unusable. They are unusable because my neighbors have emitters placed down there, and I'm being irradiated through the glass such that it is unbearable, and I get not just irradiated like your skin is burning, but actual shots, like hard pulses, you know. And these, well, you probably seen kind of like, you can Google and find these high power lasers where you can see a piece of metal and an electromagnetic pulse is shot into the metal and essentially punches a little hole into the metal. So this is how powerful lasers can be, right? So lasers are not just, oh, make a little dot like a laser pointer. lasers can cut steel. Okay? But you don't even need a laser. Laser is coherent light, for those of you who are, versed in physics. You don't need a laser. You can have just a highly focused or collimated beam. You can have a high intensity pulse, and all these things can be generated, and with all of them you can mutilate people. The point is that you can mutilate people now inside their own home behind walls. And this is what has been done. So there's another thing I discovered, which was essentially, I don't really have my roll of aluminium, but, or maybe I do. So to just survive when the intelligence agencies start mutilating you, I had to have aluminium everywhere. And what the intelligence agencies do, or their agents rather, they live out their sexual sadism, or they want to mutilate women as hard as they can. And with women, combine that with sexual sadism, what a lot of victims, including myself, report is that they are shot in the genitals, they are shot in the breasts. So when they shot me in my breasts, and also my lungs especially, to cause as much damage, I also received shots to the spine. But when it was inside my body, I at first started taking a one sheet or several sheets of aluminium and trying to block out the beam on the side of my body where it hurt. And I discovered that when the pain was deep inside, that didn't help. And as they kept shooting into my lungs and into my breasts, I discovered that taking aluminium and wrapping it around myself, entirely around myself, blocked the beam. By the way, if you do that, you have to use several layers of aluminium, because I think there are small gaps and small holes inside the aluminium, and it's the way the fiber is, but you have to overlay several layers of this normal baking foil aluminium so that you have protection, in my experience. So 3 or 4 layers, should do it. But essentially, I had to wrap it around myself several times. And why was that? As soon as I did, the pain would stop. And that is because if you take a human body, and let me show it here. So let me say, this is now you're looking down on a human body from above, okay? I mean, I could draw a head, but this is just roughly a diagram, okay? So just imagine a human body. If you want to cause pain inside, you're looking now top down, okay? If you want to cause pain somewhere inside here or here, you can't just use one beam. Because with one beam, you have no control where the energy will be deposited. The beam might cause pain here when it hits the tissue the first time, or it might cause pain further down here when it hits the bone, depending on what sort of radiation it is, right? When it hits denser material. But if you really want to be certain that you cause pain exactly here, what you can do is use 2 beams and overcross them. Because then exactly at the overcross, you will have twice the intensity, and with that you can steer it. So if you then keep this beam there, and you swing this other beam down, and now you swing it down to be here, then the overcross will be here, and suddenly the person will feel pain there. Do you understand what I mean? So if you just have one beam, you've no idea where the pain is being caused. If you've got 2 beams, the pain will be caused where the intensity is largest. So it will be here. And then if you keep this beam constant here, and you take another beam, right, this one, and instead of having the overcross here, you swing the beam down, then the overcross will be down here, causing pain there. Do you see? And if you have these 2 beams, you can essentially move them around, and by moving the overcross, you can scan out the entire volume inside a human being, and you can cause pain anywhere. Yeah? And this is what I discovered essentially when they were shooting painfully into my lungs and into my breast, essentially, because I blocked it out, because when I put aluminium around, essentially the aluminium, I'm not sure if this pen is sorry, this pen isn't intense enough. When I use aluminium, yeah, that's typical, isn't it, these whiteboard markers. Sorry, I think this is a permanent marker. I should use that one. Anyway, so when I use aluminium, if you just put it here to block out that beam, then first of all you have this beam still triggering the point which hurt before, still depositing energy, so it continues hurting. But also what I think they do is that as soon as one beam is blocked, a computer immediately turns on another beam and then hits you exactly there as well. And this is why I couldn't block it. But if I put the aluminium all around myself, then all the beams from whatever direction were blocked out, and suddenly inside I was pain-free. So then no single beam could go inside, right? And I was suddenly, pain-free. And when I did that, I suddenly discovered that they were shooting these pulses, because depending on where this thing was hitting the aluminium, I would suddenly hear sound being emitted. This is meant to be sound here, because it would hit the aluminium on that layer, and the very small sound would be like this, but very, very fine. So essentially this is it. And with this experiment, I mean, this is essentially, imagine me top down, right? And then when I wrapped myself in aluminium, suddenly the pain was gone. And that also showed it's not a satellite, because from above they could have still shot into me, but they didn't. It wasn't coming from above, it was coming horizontally from around myself, from properties around myself. So this is how I could tell. And you can tell where these things are, where these emitters are, by keep blocking out the areas. And if you keep feeling pain, then you have to block out more areas. Now this works when they're using pulses to shoot into you, which they do all the time. So today when I had, head protection, because they keep shooting into my forehead, they started shooting into my eyes. And there I could literally feel from where this was coming from, because if I turned my head, they would hit me here. So sometimes they also just use one beam, to just punch it into your eyes like that. And sometimes they use two beams if they want to hit parts deeper inside your body. Now, this is the general idea. And then I already mentioned that what I also discovered is that they would essentially turn on beams, So to just make a neater image, let me draw this again. So this is my home. Okay, and the wall structure looks a lot more complicated in a home. You don't just have 4 rooms like that, but you know what I mean. So these are the external walls. And then if I'm sitting here, I discovered that I would be hit from this beam. If I went, over to this room and I sat there, then I would be hit by this beam. But then sometimes, as I said, they would overcross beams inside me, and that would go, this beam would punch through, so it's meant to be a straight line, by the way, okay? But I'm not managing very well. And then so basically there's an emitter here, an emitter there, and when they're overcrossing, it seems to go through like that, okay? And then you immediately see, okay, hang on a second, you've explained that they go through one wall, but here it goes through 2 walls, right? But it doesn't matter, because if it goes through 2 walls, then by the time it's here, you still have, so after the 1 wall, here you've got 50% intensity, and after the 2nd wall there, you have 25% intensity. So if you crank up the power, you can still cause pain. And besides, you're overcrossing 2 beams, so you can still cause pain inside a person. Okay, and now the question is, can they really be so precise? I mean, this must be like 50 meters away at your next door neighbors, or maybe 100 meters away. Can they actually shoot a beam this precisely? And the answer is yes, they can. Yeah, the answer is just, yeah, they can. It's that simple. They can. And that's because we have, modern steering software. We can also suspend things such that they're fairly stable, and then modern software can use lasers to actually map out where they should be shooting and then also correct it. So in principle, this could be done like that as well. And I do have evidence that this is being done like that, because sometimes, sometimes they would shoot into me, like the same 2 beam lines would just keep firing, and then I would take my measuring device and I would swing it around myself, and I could suddenly hear intense pulses from one side, then nothing, and intense pulses from that direction as well, which was not directly linearly aligned with the other direction. So this is how it's done, this is how they target you. And then there's one more aspect, and that's essentially there are all these wall thicknesses. So, you know, how does it work? Well, essentially the way it works is that you have a computer which is correcting for the thickness. So in a sense, as you're swinging this around and suddenly start passing through 2 walls instead of 1, you can essentially create a software that automatically corrects for this. And the way you can do that is you can obtain, so before you even start shooting, here, you can obtain a floor plan. Hang on, let me just... In principle, you can obtain a floor plan of the entire building. Where are the walls, you know, where do they overcross? Because sometimes you have maybe, you know, subdivisions like that, and then different walls and so on, and, you know, the rooms are not perfectly aligned. And essentially, you can do many things. I think you can obtain a floor plan using radar, and then read out that 3D floor plan, and use that as a map to correct your lasers. What I have personally also experienced is that my targeting became ever more sophisticated. So I believe that essentially they used my body as a target, and they had a learning algorithm. So essentially, I am here and I'm going around the house, and sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm there. And literally, they're using these, you know, sci-fi guns to shoot at me, and bit by bit they learn how they can actually, the software can aim and find out how it can actually hit me. Now, there are several ways you could do that. I mean, in principle, you could just, every time I'm out of the house, go around with sensors and try to hit these sensors and calibrate it like that. That can be done. Also, you can use things like, because these electromagnetic waves can also set off chips we might have inside ourselves, or nanoparticles or RFID chips that then emit, you could in principle also have maybe a signal that measures the intensity of the incoming beam and echo that back. But in any case, what I did certainly learn is that as they kept shooting at me, at first they only shot at me when I was stationary in my room. Then I've got a corridor, and then they started shooting at me as I was going along the corridor. But I would notice that because of the thickness of the walls, the way I was hit wasn't the same. So it would kind of be really intense when I went through a door frame, and then stop being as intense, and then get really intense again in the other door frame, and so on. And get very intense when there was a window and a door frame aligned, and so on. And this sort of intensity variation with a stationary beam to my head, I could feel. And then after a while, it just became one beam of, you know, as far as I could tell, intense, the same intensity. And that to me would imply that they have a learning algorithm that targets me and actually calibrates the intensity using me as a target. So this is pretty sick stuff, isn't it? Because essentially you, if you're a victim, and I certainly, I'm being shot to pieces by a bunch of degenerate people in the intelligence agencies and their buddies in the military. Well, I'm not sure if the military is involved. I mean, could be. They have got the weapons and so on. But the intelligence agencies have the stalking network and so on and so on. But this is essentially what's being done to me. So when I talk to you about today, you know, and how I was being shot at, I'm sitting here inside my study, you know, and I'm being shot in the face non-stop by pulses, and sometimes I'm being fried from 2 beams overcrossing inside me. And the video, for example, that I uploaded, that you can see on YouTube, which is called Hack Attack and I think Assaults Every 60 Seconds. Hack Attack and Assaults Every 60 Seconds, or something like that. Excuse me. Sorry, they're just triggering my nose. What you can see there is that I use the measuring device, and I'm showing how the intensity jumps up by a factor of 100 exactly every 60 seconds. And then there's this hack attack, and after that the intensity also jumps up every 60 seconds, but it's slightly shifted inside the minute. You know, it's not exactly on the same second of the minute as before, but it's still 60 seconds, showing that the hack attack and the assaults were correlated. However, what it actually shows is that this thing is computer steered, because I'm being shot into at 4 a.m. in the morning. And actually, as I was filming that, I had the measuring device on, and I had the camera on and I was trying to sleep. I was lying there with my eyes closed, trying to just bear the pain and just cowering down until they shot into my kidney, and then you can hear me burst out crying. But essentially what you can see is that these Nazi degenerates put down a computer, and then that computer, as you're lying in bed here, because you could also be lying down, you know, so you're lying in bed, and then these people just shoot into you, and they set the computer to just shoot into you as you're sleeping. So as you become unconscious in your sleep, they can essentially punch beams into any part of your body, your kidney, your lungs, and they do. They do. Not just sometimes. Pretty much every morning I wake up damaged, because they use the fact that I cannot protect myself to do that. And this also shows why just blocking a window, say you have a window here, you can block the window with aluminium, but if the emitters here, they can shoot through the wall. So, and then you have to think about, okay, then I have to cover my entire outside wall with aluminium, okay, and not aluminium necessarily, but with metal, you know, something that reflects it, blocks it. Okay, you can do that, but you also have to be aware that it becomes like a mirror. So it's deflecting the beams because it's reflecting them, right? That's why they don't go inside. So if you've got anywhere a small hole, they will shoot through there, and essentially this thing will be just bouncing around inside, right? Reflecting on the inside. Okay, not if you've got this entire home, okay, there's always, the intensity reduces every single time, but you have to be aware of this when you have, for example, shielding. Let's say you're lying down and you put up shielding around yourself, like this, but you didn't notice that there's a little hole. Then from the outside, they would essentially just keep shooting at this thing. And from here, it always gets reflected, right? Like that. It just bounces off. So these beams bounce off. But one beam, when they hit you here, goes through here, and then bounces around and then hits you anyway. If you see what I mean. So if you have shielding, whatever type of shielding you have, you have to be careful what sort of shielding you use. You have to be aware that you might actually create for yourself a cabinet of mirrors. That's to the best of my knowledge. If the material absorbs this, then of course that's a good thing. Okay, but this is essentially how it's done, to the best of my knowledge, and that is just the direct irradiation with microwave weapons. And then they have also the brain stuff, the implants, and so on and so on. But this is how I have been mutilated all day long now. And this is what they're doing. I've also been mutilated by other means. They vibrated my arm again this morning in the shower, again using nakedness, the fact that I'm naked in the shower, to then really humiliate me. So my entire arm starts vibrating. I collapsed in pain in the shower. And essentially you have this kind of like Auschwitz sort of setup. You probably know that the people who the Germans murdered in the concentration camps, they stripped them naked, again to like humiliate them. You're gonna kill them, but you want to humiliate them. That's essentially a psychopath's sexual arousal. They really want to enjoy every last bit of humiliating, mutilating you. And it's a telltale sign of psychopathology when you go through this sort of stuff, So again, from that instant alone, I can tell that the people who are radiating me are clinical psychopaths, if that hadn't been obvious. They are what's called Sexualtäter in German, so like they're driven by sexual violence. Their main goal is not national security, if that wouldn't be bleedingly obvious. Their main point is sexual arousal. So I can confirm that here in Switzerland, the intelligence agencies also, like in Britain, like in Germany, essentially run sexually driven clinical psychopaths. These men are essentially serial killers, as far as I can tell. So the intelligence agencies are mutilating women in their own population with serial killers. That's what I'm trying to get across to you. And and this is how it's done. And they are essentially relying on the fact that we're all meant to be too fucking stupid, excuse my language, but this is essentially what it is, right? To understand that if you have a microwave beam, it goes through a wall as if it was milky glass. So inside our homes, we're not safe. We just cannot see outside, that's all. We essentially are behind milky glass and they are shooting at us. We are like sitting ducks or like fish in a barrel or whatever analogy you would like to take. But that's essentially it. And Meanwhile, these degenerates don't do anything. They don't contribute to society. They are truly the detritus of society. And we should, I think, have them somehow contained or removed. But essentially that's what they're doing. They are using the fact that our home building materials are transparent to microwave weapons, to mutilate us to death in our own home, in our sleep, and sometimes during waking times by shooting at us. So today I had an entire day of having my teeth demolished specifically. On other days they're shooting into my heart, on yet other days they're shooting into my head. And I can also tell that there's a shift service that seems to switch over at 7 p.m. because at 7 p.m. the intensity just ramped up. And I did have that several times before. It would kind of quieten down as these people get bored, or maybe they're reprogramming the systems to shoot at me. And then at 7 p.m. it would ramp up when a new batch of degenerate psychopathic Nazis, and their teenage degenerates would come in keenly and launch into another project of mutilating a person to death inside their own home. But this is what I'm trying to tell you. If you don't understand what the hell the victims are talking about, it is this, okay? So, I don't want to make the video any longer. I hope this helped. Thank you very much for listening, and I really hope that if you're one of the victims that we can shut this down, because we're dealing with the Gestapo. Thank you very much.